This was about to get messy. What started as a dishonest GM was evolving into a full-scale restart of the company. All this halfway around the world, no less. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the CEO's Field Manual. I'm your host, Phil Kerper, Managing Director of Ringling Business Solutions. The title of this episode is Computers Out the Windows, the Night We Took Our Company Back. If you missed part one, it's on this channel entitled, I was new to the job, one of my GMs was stealing us blind. In short, part one covered my joining a U.S. manufacturing company as president, meeting the GM of our company in China, I'll call him GM John in the story, and beginning to investigate concerns that he may be stealing. I had just had a meeting on the topic with the chairman and VP of finance of our parent company, and the VP and I were headed over to China for a business review and to see if we could determine how large of a problem we had. Buckle up. The conclusion to this story is a doozy. So we're off to China and our first day of business review. I'll give GM John this. He was well prepared for our visit and ready for a proper business review. He and his team did a nice job of an overall business update and functional area reviews by each of the leaders. I also learned that this core team, John, plant manager, and the sales manager, were very tight and loyal to each other. We carefully worded our financial questions so as to not reveal our suspicions, and the VP of Finance was able to ask the accountant for many details that he could use later to build up our facts. It was a good break that the VP of Finance was able to spend dedicated time with the finance team as I spent time with John and the other key members. We left with a full file of trial balances and accounting transactions. I'm not so sure John realized just how much data our VP was able to get. I've been fortunate not have to deal with many dishonest people in the years of executive management. But when I have, I found a disadvantage of dishonest people. They think they are smarter than they actually are, while thinking everybody else is just not as smart. That's probably why they think they'll never get caught, but almost always do. It was a multi-day review. We learned a ton, not only about our potential issue, but with the business operation in general. There's nothing like spending days on site and in person with remote locations of the companies. You just learn so much more than you can any other way. Flying back, I asked our VP what he thought. We agreed we would independently write down a figure on a piece of paper and then reveal. Is he stealing? And if so, how much? I wrote down yes, about a 2 million USD total. The VP had it around 600 a year, 2.5 million over time. He thought it was ramped up after a little lighter initial years. When the dust settled several months later, we were very close to spot on. This was completely outrageous. The company was actually making pretty good money, and with good leadership, could have been reinvesting in a strong growth and success plan. Instead, this skunk was stealing everyone blind. We crunched the numbers all the way home and met with the chairman of the parent company on our return. What would you do if you were the owner in this situation? This was the moment of truth. GM John's time with the company was pretty much over, but did the chairman want him fired and potentially sued or fully prosecuted? Remember, this is a U.S.-owned company in China with a China-born executive that had dual citizenship. We think he's stealing from us. The police might just tell us, too bad, so sad. To say the chairman was pissed, though, does not do it justice. The money was one thing, but the breach of trust, after what the chairman had done to help the uncle, the nephew, it was just unacceptable. I was tasked with implementing a plan that proved a criminal case, took over the operations of the company, and rebuilt the China business without all the nonsense. It's funny. Your priorities as a senior executive can change very quickly. We always have to be ready to adapt. The goals of the U.S. business had not changed. That's what I was hired to impact. This was simply added on top. Over the coming months, I implemented several key actions. I found and hired the top lawyer and forensic accounting team I could find in China. I got very fortunate on this because the firm was amazing and had helped U.S. companies with holdings in China over many, many years. It took several months to get our ducks in a row. The plan was to have the legal China team show up unannounced and secure the company data needed to audit the details and hopefully confirm guilt. At the same time, we would fire GM John and assign an intern GM. The intern GM was one of the lawyers who had an accounting background and operational chops. I got very lucky there too. He was great. The tricky parts were access to the banks and other key company authority rights in China. This led to what was one of the largest lessons from the ordeal. When GM John was made GM, the U.S. company let most of the authority needed to run the company transfer from his uncle to him. This meant it would be difficult to freeze accounts and access them after we termed John. There was no easy way around this without alerting him. So we had to live with it and be prepared to lose cash that was in the accounts, plus the hassle of gaining full access to our company. John did not leave much cash in the accounts, so we just figured that it would be gone. We resigned ourselves that we would have to shutter the company for a short time after we made our move. We were hoping it'd be closed for a few weeks. It turned into months before we were able to open and begin to ramp up the business. To add even more moving parts, unrelated to this ordeal, we were on borrowed time at the current physical location. So we decided to also relocate the operations. Initially, we were going to reopen at the old facility, finish building the backlog, and then move to our new orders to our new location. Given it took months to reopen, we ended up reopening at the new location with new leadership and mostly new employees. This was now going to be a full-blown startup. D-Day arrived, and we caught a break that GM John was out of town. I was specifically not to be there that day. This was to be an independent audit ordered by the parent company. It was 2 a.m. Eastern Time, and I was up and waiting for an update when my phone rang. What followed was one of the wildest phone calls I ever received. On arrival, our team was asked to wait in the conference room. We had folks outside the building as well. My phone call started with my senior counsel relatively calmly painting a picture that they had arrived at the facility, were led to a conference room, and the plant manager and several other subordinates were now joining them to discuss the visit. Things then escalated quickly. I heard an argument ensue where my senior attorney and his associates were shouting, and you could hear things getting physical. The phone dropped with a clunk. After a minute of more chaos, the phone went dead. I had this on my speakerphone, and my wife overheard it from our bedroom and came out and asked, "What the heck is going on?" I said, "You wouldn't believe it if I told you, but it's not good." Outside the plant, our team observed employees handing computers out the windows. Meanwhile, our lead counsel was being blocked from leaving the conference room. The cops were called and finally restored order. Our team had the documents needed to convince the police they had the right to be there and secure the building, which we finally did. Wow. My lead counsel had a black eye, the plant manager and the sales manager had vanished, but the plant was secured. GM John took the time to call me and share with me every curse word he knew in English. Then he too vanished. But we had the data. The lawyers and accountants now had to build the case while the interim GM worked on the relocation plan. Gaining full authority and access to the company and the accounts and resetting them up while rebuilding the team took months, but everybody got their job done. The chairman was still adamant that he wanted criminal charges, and the key was finding how the money got taken and then connecting that to GM John. The details finally showed it. Another lesson. Relentless detail work in cases like this. It really matters. You can't assume things. You have to really dig and find facts, and then you can uncover what's really going on. We found the shadow vendors that GM John was sending funds to. What was harder was connecting them directly to John. The break was the addresses. They happened to be the same addresses as several of John's family members in residential neighborhoods. One of our very sharp accountants noticed the addresses were in residential areas. That detail opened the door. It turned out these folks were not involved. John had just used their addresses to set up shadow companies and asked them to hold his mail for him to retrieve. I guess he was not that smart after all. We were ready to go to the police, and I flew to China for a meeting with the detectives. This meeting was as surreal as it gets. There was back and forth between our lawyers and the detectives, all in Mandarin. Then the translations started to get shared. The detectives initially were not enthusiastic at all. As suspected, we're a U.S. company. We got screwed because we hired a dishonest GM. Not their problem. Then they completely turned. What changed was when we told them what GM John's compensation was. A detective in China maybe makes several thousand US per year. When they heard what John was being paid and then how much he also likely stole, they were almost as pissed off as my chairman. Too greedy for them to let it pass, is what they said. They checked and reported that GM John was not currently in China. They told us next time he entered the country, they would arrest him. I asked what turned out to be a completely dumb question. I asked the detectives if they arrested him, what would be the likelihood of a conviction? They looked at me like I was an idiot and said, everyone we arrest is guilty, so 100%. I had forgotten for a second I was not in the U.S. A few months later, I learned GM John had been arrested while attempting to re-enter China. I also learned he claimed to have incriminating evidence on all of us. The FBI never paid me a visit, so I guess that did not work out. I never saw GM John again. The company ramped back up. We hired the interim GM as our permanent general manager, and no, we did not have to wine and dine our customers to secure sales. Some takeaways and lessons, and there's a lot here. It's an amazing story. Your priorities as a senior executive can change quickly, so be ready to adapt. The China company was rarely highlighted during my interviews, but turned out to be a large project year one. Second, relentless detailed work really matters when you need to find hard facts. In this case, the deep look at the financials exposed the problem. Careful review of the vendor profiles connected the issue to GM John. Next, have U.S. executive banking and operational authority over international divisions or companies. This slipped through the cracks because of trust with the uncle. It turned out to be costly. And never compromise your core business practice standards. No matter where you are doing business, your standards have to be your standards. Thanks for joining this episode of the CEO's Field Manual. We'll see you soon. Thanks everybody. Please subscribe and we'll see you at a future video.